Let's talk about 17 tips for passing the assessment centre. What's up guys, it's Mike from Job Ready English. Sorry, as you can guess, I'm not in my usual studio. I just find myself out and about today, so I'm working from home. Today we're going to talk about one of our most requested videos from 2021, which was some tips for passing assessment centres. Here's a little hint, I'm not going to ask you to be the timekeeper for a group discussion. So if you want more videos like this, make sure that you subscribe to the channel, like the video, and also drop us down a comment down below to let us know what other videos that you'd like. Just to let you know, I do pretty much read all of the comments and we try and reply to as many as we can, as quickly as we can. It's a fantastic milestone that we reached 5,000 subscribers, and we've got a really exciting content calendar for you in 2022. So let's jump into it. Today I'm going to talk to you about assessment centres. So as some of you may know, I have been coaching international and home students to get jobs in the UK at the biggest and best companies since 2013. So just as a little bit of a backstory, why am I qualified to talk on this subject? Basically, I roughly estimate that I have helped clients to prepare or been in training with clients, actually training them face to face. Do you remember when we had that? And also online for assessment centres about 1,000 times. So for about 5 years when I ran another coaching firm, we would have physical training sessions and I would be there twice a week, 2 sessions a day. I did that for about 5 years. And also I've trained hundreds of clients for different assessment centres, mainly based around professional services and investment banks, but we've covered lots of different companies over the years since 2013. So I feel uniquely qualified to speak on this subject. If you want to know more, then you can check out some of our case studies and exercises down in the link in the description below on our course page. That's always super helpful, and you get to listen to me talk through stuff blow by blow with step-by-step explanations, worksheets and summaries. So let's get into the 17 tips. Before I begin, something important to recognize is an assessment centre is essentially a very small social experiment. So you're putting together a group of strangers and you're seeing how they interact, cooperate both amongst each other, with the content and exercises, and also with the staff of that company. So it's a good way to think about it. It's kind of like meeting someone for the first time you went to university. I absolutely crapped myself, if I'm honest. So that's all that it is as an assessment centre. Tip number 1, you're already good enough to do the job if you get to an assessment centre. Sometimes candidates feel like they're still being tested to see if they're good enough. You already are. You're basically being put through your paces to test individual skills, which generally tend to revolve around teamwork, leadership, problem solving, working under pressure, and being adaptable and flexible, which is a good reflection of high value professional service type jobs, where you're going to be interacting with clients who have paid a lot of money. You're going to be dealing with people who don't have a lot of time, and you're going to have to be flexible and quite quick on your feet, as well as very often you're going to be switching a lot of times between teams, between the people that you work with. Tip number 2, everyone is as nervous as you. So I tend to typify the type of people who you're going to meet at assessment centres into 3 types. Jibber jabberer. This is the person who can't stop talking and seems to talk over everybody and talk loudly and basically just have no concept of social niceties, allowing other people to speak. Second person is going to be the silent one. So the silent one just sits there while thinking, God, I wish I could say something. I wish I could do something. Oh my God, that was what I was going to say. And the third one is what I call the furious writer. So these tend to manifest in group discussions, and they'll sit there writing lots of notes and listening to everything that's being said, but they don't tend to say very much. The trick is, everybody is just as nervous as you. Nobody turns up there without a care in the world thinking, it doesn't really matter what happens. And that's a really good way to think about things. So just remember that, and what you're seeing is just a way that they are displaying their nerves, and then you learn to navigate and manage that person's behaviour. Tip number 3, train hard to compete easy. So this is something that we do with clients in one-to-one sessions, and we always say, so basically when we're preparing clients every week essentially for assessment centres, we tend to say, make sure you practice some case studies, make sure you practice presentations, make sure you practice the elements that you're going to be appearing in, And generally there tends to be one thing which is going to be more important than other things. So for example, next week we have clients going to the final assessment centre for a large multinational energy company and also for a large professional services firm. And we tend to zero in on the one exercise, which number one is your obvious weakness, something you really struggle with. For a lot of people, that's going to be presentations or group discussions. That's where people really tend to struggle. And then we try and think about the exercises that we can do to train those skills. Group discussions tend to be quite difficult because unless you can randomly get a couple of people together and try and do some form of open-ended discussion, it tends to be hard. Really good practice I find for this is if you're kind of struggling with confidence and anxiety, go and do some meetups. Go and meet some people, engage with strangers, engage in random conversation, of course in a safe way, but this is quite a good way to sort of overcome those nerves of meeting strangers, being out and about, and a lot of people do suffer from some form of social anxiety. What you find is if you do train hard and train well, actually on the day, because everyone is nervous and a lot of people don't prepare, you'll generally find it quite easy and you'll give yourself the ability to relax and really just be yourself. Tip number 4, everyone can pass or everyone can fail. So we've had candidates go to assessment centres where all of the people have passed. They'll generally tend to be small groups of 4 to 6, or everybody can fail. So that's something really important to recognise when you're engaging and trying to work as part of a team. So don't feel like you have to work against people, always feel like you have to work with them. The crux of this tends to be around the group discussion because it's the only time that you really have to engage with other people. But it's an important thing to recognise because I do feel it changes your mindset and the way that you're going to approach people, treat people, and also try and form some kind of relationship with them, because these could end up being people who you end up working with for years to come. So it's important that though, yes, you are competing with them, you really have to compete as a team rather than just as an individual, irrespective of what that other person does or is. Tip number 5, remember to talk and listen. So this is a really important point for group discussions. A lot of times, all of the candidates will be sitting there. What will tend to happen is that 1 or 2 people will speak more than everybody else. And therefore you've got some people, remember you've got the jibber jabberer, the quiet ones, and also the furious note taker. So what you need to think about is if you're not really a naturally charismatic person, a natural leader, somebody who tends to lead the conversation, then you're going to have to listen very carefully. What that means is as you're talking, you can say, oh yeah, that's a great idea, that's really good. A lot of assessment now is online. You could be showing positive body language, you could really be paying attention, but don't take your eye off the ball, because an opportunity is going to present itself where you can speak, either because you've been given unique material that you have to present upon. A lot of group discussions tend to be structured around main source material, and then each candidate will get their own solution which they have to present and then discuss with the group. Or there will be an opportunity for you to agree with the person that's speaking more, speak to them, answer their questions, offer some useful insight based upon the information and the material that you've been given. So it's really important. Don't just think about talking, think about listening and really paying attention to what's going on. Which leads me to tip number 6, pay attention. So don't sit there and be reading the material, be taking notes, be thinking about what everybody else is doing. Just be thinking about how can I contribute, how can I help? How can I come across as a really positive and motivated individual, even if I'm not getting the opportunity to speak right now? A lot of times I can see candidates, and I've seen them in training and also one-to-ones, that they get really frustrated, they get kind of hacked off, and that really comes across in their face and their body language. Ultimately, everybody can't lead and everybody can't follow. There's going to be a natural hierarchy and order of things which comes to pass within the course of your social experiment that is your assessment centre. But just remember, if you're the one that's paying attention, picking up on what people are saying, responding to them, using their names, using the data and the source material, you're going to be able to establish yourself as somebody who is not only useful but also trustworthy and relevant to the conversation. That is going to be, you'll sort of create an opportunity within the hierarchy where people are going to turn to you, listen to your opinion and give you the opportunity to speak. But you're not going to do that if you're sitting there sulking like a big baby, thinking about all the things that you could say or could do. Tip number 7, prepare questions beforehand. A lot of big companies' assessment centres now incorporate some element of introducing the company, getting to meet graduates. You might even have a partner interview on the same day. So what you want to do is prepare some questions beforehand. Now, the way that you do this is trying to ask questions that are insightful and help you to learn about the experience that you're going to get. So frequently, and this comes up in interviews, candidates will talk about, oh, how much am I going to get paid? When am I going to hear back? Blah, blah, blah. Well, that's not really very interesting, is it? It's not really very innovative. They have a process for that. Questions that I really like is stuff like, what's been your biggest lesson working here? How did you start working here? What do you think would be a good course or thing to do in order to prepare me for this job? What's the biggest mistake that you've made? What's the single best piece of advice that you've got from a member of staff here? Use the opportunity to learn from people's experience who have trodden the path before you, particularly if you're speaking to other graduates. And also, that's going to make you a little bit more memorable than just peppering them with really stupid and inane questions that ultimately they don't know about and HR is probably going to deal with anyway. Tip number 8, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. So this is something that I've really I took on board through my martial arts training. I think it was originally attributed to Bruce Lee. I don't know if that attribution is correct, but I find it's very true for many things in life, and particularly in the assessment centre. So whether you're sitting there doing an online test, an individual exercise, a presentation, a group discussion, a role play, live coding, pairs coding, whatever it is that you're doing, go slowly first. Make sure you really understand the question, that you study the material. Say, for example, if you're in a management consulting, market sizing case study interview, then you would take the time to think, okay, how many pianos are there in New York, right? And then you would ask the interviewer some questions. I realize it seems like I'm jumping around, but you'll find if you say, okay, do I understand the question? Are there any things that I don't understand or things that I would need to know in order to answer this question better? Can I ask someone about it? Can I make some effective notes? How much time do I have? All these things will allow you to really kind of almost like a mini plan every time that you start each exercise. So going slower rather than just going straight out the gate, going really fast, and then kind of getting lost in the middle. And I observed this with candidates over and over again when I did that 5 years of observation and training live face-to-face, which is that the candidates who initially went a little bit slower but knew what they were doing always crushed the candidates who rushed and just kind of ended up being a little bit lost. Tip number 9, do your research on the format and the exercises. Companies will generally send out, if they're a really big multinational company, they'll have some sort of little glossy brochure or PDF. Some of them will just send a simple email about what you need to prepare for, but go and do your homework, whether that be Glassdoor, Student Room, Wikijob. There are tons of forums out there. And if I was you, that would be the first thing that I would do. I would literally sit there, collate all of the memories together, find places where either A, they're recent. So generally I tend to find that anything that's older than 6 months to 1 year, it's not really very useful. The more I tend to give priority to recency and also to depth. So, and then to repetition. So what I mean by that is, has it been done recently? Has that person written out a paragraph that is really quite helpful? And also, are there different people and their memories and recollections of that where they are basically saying the same thing? From that, I can then reverse engineer and think, with reasonable likelihood, we're going to have A, B, and C. Almost all assessment centres will have an individual exercise, a group exercise, and some form of interaction with another person. So that could be a partner interview, it could just be interaction with graduates, general Q&A, whatever it is, they will always tend to have those 3 elements. The more that you can understand about the format, that will then inform your training and what you're going to do, what resources you may purchase, or what case studies you're going to get, and so on and so forth. Tip number 10, everything is not assessed, but you are always being observed. So there's going to be certain elements, generally for the biggest companies who hire the most graduates, where they'll say, oh, you're going to be doing a morning presentation where we're going to tell you about how awesome our company is, or you're going to be meeting our graduates, but it's not assessed. You may not be being assessed, but people will always be watching you. And ultimately, it may come down to the fact that generally, say for example, you're interacting with the graduates, afterwards the company will probably say to the grads, well, is there anyone you really like the look of? Is there anybody that kind of stood out to you, or is there anybody that you really didn't like the look of? Like they're going to ask for some element of observation, something that they're thinking, well, yeah, that person seemed really interesting, really bright, really involved, really enthusiastic, really confident, or you're not going to be noticed. I think generally we kind of want to lean towards getting noticed rather than not getting noticed, because ultimately I always say to all of my clients, yeah, we're here to cooperate, but we're here to compete, which means that we need to get noticed, because otherwise we may well be forgotten. So just always bear that in mind as you conduct yourself through the assessment centre, particularly if it's face-to-face, that you need to be kind of like up, right? Which means you're like, you know, positive, happy, confident is something we're going to talk about in a little bit. But if you're just kind of down or feeling a bit tired or a bit like, oh, I'm a bit bored now, that's going to be noticed, because they're going to think, well, if you can't do a 4-hour assessment centre with breaks, how are you going to work every day, Monday to Friday, 8 to 9 hours a day, or even more with us, right? If you feel yourself getting a bit low or just kind of running out of energy, because assessment centres are really emotionally draining. A lot of clients, after they do their first assessment centre, it really knocks them for six, and they're like, oh, I'm knackered. Like, I haven't really done anything like that before. You know, just slip off to the loo, put a bit of water on your face, maybe sit in the cubicle and give yourself a little pep talk, and then get back in the game. Yeah, it's really important, because you're not going to get a second chance to make a first impression. Tip number 11, chunk down your timings. This is quite relevant for individual exercises like written exercises, case study, for group discussions, because you're going to have a certain number of questions, a certain amount of time to read and review the material, and also a certain amount of time to get that completed. So a really good tip is, if you're doing a written exercise, for example, write out how much time you've got to write your introduction, the answers to these questions, and then your conclusion, and stick to those timings. Always wear a watch or have something where you can see the time, just so that actually you know that, right, okay, I don't need to think how much do I need to do. I just need to think, well, I've got 2 minutes to do this. I'm going to do the best that I can. When you chunk down your timings as well, it makes it seem much more manageable. And I find that setting small constraints in a highly pressurized situation does make candidates perform much better. So always think, I've got 20 minutes, right? How am I going to set out those 20 minutes? Tip number 12, be likable, happy, and approachable. People like people who are like them, but also people don't like people who are just bloody miserable, right? So if you're sitting there, you're not smiling to anybody, you're not really engaging, you're not doing small talk. Look, I understand if you're anxious or you feel socially awkward, but also recognize that you're going to work for a company where you're going to be interacting with people a lot, so you need to play the game. Which generally it might be like asking people their names, how they are, what they're up to, you know, kind of saying, oh, that was a good point, that's a great idea, being positive, being confident, being upbeat, basically showing that, look, I'm somebody who you want to have in your life. It's kind of like, you know, when you get a phone call from a friend or from an acquaintance, and you look at it and you're like, oh no, not this guy. Like she's just going to moan, or he's just going to be saying something about somebody else. And you get calls from someone else and like, oh God, I'm really happy to speak to that person. Be that person that people want to speak up the phone to, not that one that go, oh no, not really. Tip number 13, don't be the timekeeper, just be useful. So this is a really common one that I get generally through one-to-one consultations that are booked through people who know me through YouTube. When they're preparing for assessments, and they'll go, I watched a video and it said that I should be the timekeeper. And I'm just like, look, you're not a talking clock. So being the timekeeper is fine. So chunking down the time and saying, okay, we're going to need 5 minutes for this, 3 minutes for this, 2 minutes for this, to go, okay, guys, we're running out of time. We need to be moving on. That's fine. I mean, it's kind of okay. And there is an element of that you can do that. But ultimately, you need to think, every time I speak, I am useful. I am helping. I am furthering the cause of the team to reach this result. So it's not as simplistic as being the timekeeper. You'll notice that I haven't really referred to any specifics from any companies, because assessment centres do vary wildly. But ultimately, everybody has had somebody in their team who is just useless, who really contributes nothing, who doesn't solve anything, doesn't really provide any additional source of helpful commentary or solutions, and it's just kind of moaning or just talking for the sake of talking. You want to be the person that is useful, that is really contributing to solving the problem that is posed in front of you. So yes, you can be the timekeeper, but being the timekeeper isn't going to create you the opportunity for success by itself. Tip 14, use the data and material, don't just jibber jabber. So what do I mean by this? Generally, so you've got your 3 different types of people: the jibber jabberer, the silent one, and the furious note taker. So the jibber jabberer tends to just talk for the sake of talking and basically offer a load of anecdotal opinions. So basically, like, in my experience, blah, blah, blah. I just think, well, I don't think you've recently done a case study about 4 different energy companies. So maybe why don't we stick to the facts instead of just whatever you think is relevant because you saw a TikTok video, right? So what I mean by this is, when you're reading through the material, personally, I would always suggest you have some separate notes. The reason being is, if you have some sort of booklet or even a couple of pages of material, it's a time waster, and also it stops your momentum. If you're like, oh, that was on page blah blah, whereas if you have it on notes table on page 7, you can go, okay guys, so looking at the table on page 7, also when you deliver that information, it just makes you seem more confident, more believable, and ultimately more trustworthy. Because in a game of influence, in a small social experiment, say for example in a group discussion, people are going to lean towards and listen to the person who basically knows what they're doing, because the majority of people prefer to be led, they don't prefer to lead. So if you can use the data and material, you appear to be more authoritative, and that's really going to make a big difference whenever you speak and have something to add to the conversation. Tip number 15, lead, follow, or get out the way. Now this is actually a saying from, I believe, an American general. Again, don't quote me on that, not that anybody would. So what that means is, if you're leading, lead and take on board that responsibility. If you're following, follow and take on the orders of your leader. And if you're doing neither, then just sit in the corner and shut up. So sometimes what I observe is people will kind of jostle for leadership, or who can speak the most or be the most believable or most likable. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. So if it's obvious they're not the leader, then follow. If it's obvious that everyone wants to follow someone, then lead and take on board the responsibilities, which means including other people, not talking for ages and ages, and not basically just dominating the conversation because no one will speak. Because that can also be kind of reflected on from somebody who's watching that thinking, yeah, I don't think you're going to work well in a team, because there are going to be plenty of introverted people in teams who are very happy not to speak, but they're not really going to work with somebody well if they're just speaking over them all the time. So that's a good bit of advice to take on board, which is just, you will find your slot within the social experiment, within the hierarchy, then just keep that slot and be as useful as you can be. Tip number 16, enjoy it and treat it like a test run. I always say this to clients if they've never been to an assessment centre. Just bear in mind, you getting worried about failing is like being a kid and being worried about falling off the first time you get on a bike. It's understandable, but that anxiety shouldn't cripple you to not be able to perform. All you're really there to do is to try to learn and just kind of enjoy having the experience, and really remember what I said to you in tip 1, which is you're good enough to do the job. There's really nothing wrong with you. And if you kind of go with that spirit of enjoyment and fun, imagination of the potential of what could happen, you're going to find you're going to perform a lot better. Finally, tip number 17, there will always be another chance. So I've had plenty of clients pass assessment centres and plenty fail. Generally, I tend to find it's a bit of a toss of the coin, and also with partner interviews, I'd say it's a 1 in 2 shot. If I was to generalize across all companies, assessment centers and partner interviews. But if you fail, number 1, you should recognize now that it's pretty likely you're going to do it again. Because what I tend to find is with clients, they'll get stuck at online tests, and then they'll get stuck at interviews, and then they'll get stuck at assessment centers and partner interviews, and then they'll start passing. So I always say that to people when they fail. It's just like, number 1, what did you learn? What could you do better? What did you do well? And also, cool, next application. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I wanted to make it quite long and detailed as possible and really share some of my experience with you. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop us a comment down below. Let us know what we did, which of those tips applies to you, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.